It's time to take a look at the first initial Louisville football depth chart ahead of the 2022 season. Let's get right on into the show.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome into this special edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. As always, I'm your host, Dalton Pence. I serve as a credentialed media member for Cardinal Sports Zone. I also do some PA announcing work for the university in various sports. I want to take this time, as always, to personally thank you for making us your first listen of the day. And just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services 5 days a week. Your team every day. The first initial depth chart has been released for the Louisville football team via the media guide. Some surprises here and there, but a lot of the same faces that will be starting, a lot of returning starters for the Louisville Cardinals from last season. We will break it down into three segments: the offense first, the defense second, and then we're going to look at the biggest position battles heading into fall camp for the Cardinals. About a little over a month away from that first game against Syracuse. So let's start out with the offense. Starting at the quarterback position, not a lot of surprise there. Malik Cunningham, once again the starter, one of the best dual-threat quarterbacks in the country. Evan Conley listed as the backup. The third string is Brock Doman. So a lot of what we probably would have already expected. Malik Cunningham being the starter for the Cardinals once again. If you had predicted any other way, I probably question when the last time that you watched Louisville football was. Evan Conley being the backup doesn't really have a lot of surprise either, considering that Conley has gotten the most snaps outside of Cunningham than any other quarterback on the roster. Brock Doman being the third string is a little interesting because Caleb Johnson not listed among the top three, so it is worth noting that there is a whole month to try to see if he can move up the depth chart. If he doesn't, there is a likely possibility that he may end up redshirting, which isn't the worst idea. You're learning behind Malik Cunningham and company. So as of right now, not a lot of surprise there at the quarterback position, regardless of going down 1, 2, 3. The main position battle there will be at the backup spot, and whether or not Evan Conley can stay at number 2, or maybe Brock Doman rises up into that third spot, or maybe rises up into that second spot, I should say, or maybe Caleb Johnson ends up into that top 3. So that's something to look forward to. Kind of going into the offensive line from left to right: Trevor Reed, the starting left tackle; Caleb Chandler, All-American left guard, is back; Brian Hudson starting at center after the departure of Cole Bentley; Adonis Boone, the senior, starting once again at right guard; and Renato Brown starting at right tackle. All 5 starters are back for the Cardinals. It is worth noting Trevor Reed is listed as the starter over Michael Gonzalez, who saw some time at left tackle last season, especially in that first game against Mississippi. Not a lot of surprise here at the offensive line either, right? There's a lot of continuity at the quarterback position. There's a lot of continuity at the offensive line positions as well. Trevor Reed, Michael Gonzalez headlining the left tackles. Caleb Chandler at the left guard, possible All-American once again. Hudson, who played as a guard, played pretty much all throughout the offensive line. Cole Bentley, the starter last year, but the redshirt junior from Scott County is, he is the starting center this year. Adonis Boone will start at right guard, played a lot of snaps, and then also Renato Brown is, the starting right tackle. He's been playing right tackle for the Cardinals for quite some time. So the redshirt sophomore will get the start at right tackle, at least heading into fall camp. Behind those 5 starters, as I mentioned, Michael Gonzalez at left tackle, Luke Kandra and Josh Black at the left and right guards, respectively. If you remember the offensive line preview, I talked about Luke Kandra, being very highly rated coming out of high school, I believe from the state of Ohio. I think he's a Cincinnati native, if I'm not mistaken. If I am, please forgive me. But I'm really excited to see Kandra as a backup. Austin Collins being the backup center is another thing that I'm very, very excited to see. Kobe Baines, the backup right tackle. Josh Black, the backup right guard. So a lot of youth in the two deep for the Cardinals outside of the starters. Guys that are looking to prove themselves that maybe just haven't necessarily got the opportunities to do so. Luke Kandra and Austin Collins, both guys that, coming onto campus, I thought were going to compete for playing time right away. Maybe that wasn't necessarily the case, but it looks like now, after a year or so in the program, they are finally looking to play some big, significant minutes. Very interested to see Joshua Black and Kobe Baines on the two deep as well. Kobe Baines was the guy that I was high on coming out of high school. Josh Black has carved his name into the two deep as well. So it'll be interesting to see if any of the incoming freshmen, because Nick Cardwell and Ben Souders have raved about some of the incoming freshmen, especially Souders on that Cardinal Sports Zone podcast talking about some of the incoming offensive line guys that have been very, very solid in the weight room. So a lot of veteran presence in the starting roles, but the backups are guys still looking to prove themselves at running back. This is really interesting here, and we'll talk about this more in the third segment. There isn't one listed starter. The starters, literally, it says Jalen Mitchell or Trevion Cooley or Jawhar Jordan or Tiyon Evans. So, needless to say, going back to the running back preview, we probably won't have a starter at running back listed until maybe like a week before the season. A lot of times that might be sort of a game plan type thing, to where you're trying to keep the the Syracuse orange off balance because you don't necessarily know which one to prepare for. And even put it this way, even the listed starter might not necessarily be the guy that gets the majority of the snaps. Like we mentioned last year with the running back, Scott Satterfield and company liked to rotate the running backs based upon whoever was producing the most, whoever matched up well against the current defenses that they were playing, etc. Ball security as well plays a mix into the factor, but you have 4 running backs that are competing for that starting role, for those the primary touches that all bring a little bit of a different skill set to the table. You have your power back in Jalen Mitchell, kind of a do-it-all type guy in Trevion Cooley, a very, very explosive running back in Tiyon Evans, and a very solid receiving back, quick speed guy in Jawhar Jordan, who is a Syracuse transfer. So I'm really, really interested to see what happens at this running back position. And it really does not surprise me whatsoever, the fact that there are literally 4 different options at starter. It does seem like Maurice Turner is likely going to redshirt this season, which should not really come as a surprise to anyone. The true speedster that I think tied Tyreek Hill in a race at one of his camps, I believe it was. Ultimately, a lot to like at the running back position. Moving on into the tight ends, Marshawn Ford gets the starting nod at H-back. Behind him, it's Isaac Martin or Dwayne Martin. And at the traditional tight end, it is Des Melton or Francis Sherman. Marshawn Ford, in my opinion, a top 5 tight end in college football. Isaac Martin or Dwayne Martin being listed behind him makes me believe that they're going to be involved more in the receiving game, more of maybe as a blocker, as a fullback potentially. Des Melton showed some flashes last season of being a solid receiver, and then Francis Sherman also being behind Melton. I think Melton kind of getting the nod there. It'll be interesting to see what guys like Christian Peterson are able to do as well. The wide receivers to wrap up the offense, Tyler Hudson, Amari Huggins, Bruce D. Wiggins are the 3 starters. Behind Hudson is Jalen Carter. Braden Smith is the backup to Amari Huggins, Bruce, and Josh Johnson is the backup to D. Wiggins. So a lot of depth here in the 2 deep. Not a lot of wide receivers overall on the roster, though. I think there's only like 8 or 9 scholarship guys. A lot of snaps to be had. It's just a matter of who's going to go out there and prove themselves. So some uncertainty. There's not a lot of returning production outside of Amari Huggins-Bruce and Josh Johnson. Braden Smith suffered injury early on in the season last year against Florida State, so getting him back healthy, he's apparently doing really well in the offseason, according to strength and conditioning coach Ben Souders. Amari Huggins-Bruce is bound for stardom, in my opinion. And you got the two transfers in D. Wiggins and Tyler Hudson, which makes me feel confident in their chemistry with Malik Cunningham. But to have Braden Smith as a backup, to have Josh Johnson as a backup, two guys that have been in the program multiple years, and then also a guy like Jalen Carter, who former walk-on, a guy that can really I believe he's an EKU transfer as well. There's a lot of interesting options that the Cardinals can go with. I also want to see guys like Chance Morrow, Chris Bell, to see how those incoming freshmen fit into the mix. But overall, veteran leadership across the board as the starters on offense doesn't really should catch anyone by surprise. There's not a lot of surprises on offense. It's mainly sort of the younger guys competing for depth spots. So let's transition over into the defense, where there are some surprises to discuss here in just a second. We will do that after we discuss our friends and the title sponsor of the show, BetOnline. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your betting needs. Find all of your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. Find reviews and news of every league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and golf. It continues to be the top online resource for all of your sports wagering information, from live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts. They have you covered. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the action happening today. BetOnline, where the game starts. Which NFL stars moved the betting line the most? Starting this past week, Locked On has been giving you the 50 most valuable players in the NFL from the odds makers over at BetOnline. Check out Locked On NFL wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube to find out who those 50 most valuable players are, according to BetOnline. But moving over into the defensive side of things, as I mentioned with the offense, there might not be a ton of surprises outside of the backups, because Louisville has a lot of guys returning. So they're the starters, like Kei'Trel Clark being a starter, Monty Montgomery, Yasir Abdullah, Yaya Diaby, Ashton Gelati, Kendrick Duncan Jr. There's not a lot of surprise there, but there is a little bit of surprise at some other positions and at the backup spots. So that's going to be something to focus on here. Let's start from the front of the defense on the defensive line. Ashton Gelati, Yaya Diaby getting the start as the defensive ends in the 3-4 package. No real surprise there. Ramon Puryear and Mason Rieger are the backups. Zach Edwards, a backup to Puryear, and Raheem Craig listed as the backup to Rieger. So defensive line, it'll be interesting to see how some of these younger guys like Raheem Craig, Vic Brown, RJ Sorensen are able to try to, fit into the mix here throughout fall camp to see if they can create some competition at the position. I really wouldn't be surprised to see a guy like Vic Brown, who I mentioned as one of my top possible breakout guys on the defensive line. I wouldn't be surprised to see him have a solid season where he fits into the 2 deep. Ramon Puryear is also a guy that I think is going to be very, very solid in the 2 deep. So at this point in time, there's not a lot of controversy there or anything like that. Not saying there's controversy anywhere, but there's not a lot of surprise at the position, I should say. But the biggest surprise in all of the depth chart is Jermaine Lelay being listed as the backup to Dez Tell at the nose tackle position. Caleb Banks is the 3rd string. And it kind of makes sense because Lelay was a late addition. He's not just going to come in and being named the starter. He's going to have to work for it. He has all fall camp to claim that position. And with Lelay being one of the best interior defensive linemen in the country, one of the best defensive transfers, I would definitely expect him to be the starter come the first game against Syracuse. And that's no disrespect to Dez Tell or any of those guys at the nose tackle position, but more so a testament to Jermaine Lole just being one of the best interior defensive line in all of the country. And I do think that Dez Tell is going to be a big-time player for this team. He's going to play some meaningful snaps. This is going to be a position to watch for in terms of the biggest competition moving forward. So Transitioning over into the linebacking core, outside linebackers, Yasir Abdullah is the starter at the guard position. Cam Wilson, Alan Smith backing him up. Cam Wilson, the talented redshirt freshman that had some injury issues last season, kind of battled some nagging injuries. I like the fact that he's listed as a backup. Alan Smith getting some opportunity here as well. You move over into the dog position. This is one that's kind of interesting. Ben Perry being listed over Marvin Dallas as the starter at outside linebacker. Perry, the talented four-star from the Flyville 21 class. This is an interesting battle to watch for because Marvin Dallas, a special team star, a guy who transferred in from the JUCO ranks as well, four-star player. Very, very interested to see how he's able to kind of fit into this mix and be able to contend with Ben Perry, the redshirt freshman, going against the veteran senior. One of the big position battles to look out for. But overall, I do think that having a 2 deep and having this depth, it's not so much as okay, who do we have that's going to step up? It's okay, how are we going to find the snaps for all these guys? And that's a good problem to have. That's a problem that this Louisville defense hasn't necessarily had in quite some time, dating back to like early on in the Bobby Petrino era. This Bobby 2.0 era, like 2015, 2014, 15, 16, in that time. So not a lot of surprise there. There's no surprise at middle linebacker with Monty Montgomery being named the starter. Mississippi veteran transfer Momo Sinogo is the other middle linebacker starter. Dorian Jones and Jalen Alderman back up Monty, which, if you remember last season, both of those guys were forced to kind of by committee replace Monty after he went down with that season-ending injury against UCF in the third game of the season. Jalen Alderman had some solid work last season. Dorian Jones also as well, and I think that both of those guys are going to play some big-time roles. KJ Cloyd, on the other side, KJ Cloyd is a player along with Jackson Hamilton who have the talent. KJ Cloyd, a special team star from last year. I'm interested to see who's going to kind of take that backup role between Hamilton and Cloyd. That's kind of one of the more underrated position battles of the fall, is who's going to be the backup behind Momo, because Dorian Jones and Jalen Alderman, what you're going to get from those two. Cloyd, on the other hand, looking to prove himself. Jackson Hamilton looking to try to produce sooner rather than later. So very interested to see in that realm. And then finally, in the secondary, cornerback wise, Chandler Jones, Kei'Trel Clark, the listed quarterback starters. Hey, I mean, that kind of is what it is. There's not a lot to truly dissect there. Both have been starters for the past 3 years. Trey Franklin listed as the starter over Quincy Riley. That's a position battle that I'm interested to look at. Is both of those guys are very solid. Trey Franklin played some very, very solid snaps at the end of last season when Kei'Trel went down and Chandler was kind of used as more of a safety. And then Quincy Riley was one of the best non-Power 5 players in the country last year, top 5 in the country in interceptions. On the other side, behind Kei'Trel Clark, you have a guy like Rance Connor that's looking to prove himself from Flyville 21. Also, Derek Edwards. You also have, another guy in Jarvis Brownlee Jr., the Florida State transfer, that's going to be a depth piece. I think that Brownlee is going to be a guy that really contends with some of these younger guys. So you have some unfamiliarity, but it's in kind of two different, aspects. You have one in terms of incoming transfers that have played some, a good amount of college snaps, but you also have some of the younger guys like Edwards and like Rance Connor that you have to look at to try to compete for those spots. And then at the safety position, Kendrick Duncan Jr. comes back at free safety as the starter. That is huge for the Cardinals' defense. Nicario Harper, the FCS transfer, is listed as the backup. Shaverick Williams, the former JUCO guy. Not a lot of surprise there. I think Harper is going to be very solid in the 2 deep. That's going to be a bigger impact than a lot of people will recognize. The other one, though, and this is a big competition here, is Josh Minkins being listed as a safety over MJ Griffin, D'Angelo Hutchison, and Jeremiah Caldwell, 2 true freshmen as the 3rd and 4th strings, respectively. I think that that's going to be one of the biggest competitions of fall camp, is seeing how those guys compete, because Minkins, Griffin, both hard-hitting safeties that cover sideline to sideline. I think that both of them kind of have similar qualities. It's just going to be a matter of who makes the most plays. So I know it's kind of went kind of down through the line, so I apologize if there wasn't a ton of analysis there. Just a lot of veteran leadership all throughout the ranks on both offense and defense. But the depth is going to be, in the second, the second, third strings is going to be where all the, the big position battles seemingly are going to take place. James Turner, the first string kicker, Travelstead behind him. Travelstead will be tasked with the kickoffs. The long snapper is Drew Brenowitz. Brady Hodges is the holder. Mark Vassett back as the punter. Hodges is the second string punter. Jawhar Jordan, the kick returner. Josh Johnson, the punt returner. So let's take this time now to talk about the biggest position battles. We will do that here in just a second. If you're watching this on YouTube, obviously you are not going to hear the implemented advertisements. If you're listening to this on the various streaming services, you are going to hear those advertisements. So just stay tuned. At this time, before we get into the final segment, I want to say thank you all once again for making Locked On Louisville your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services 5 days a week, your team every day. So the three biggest position battles, in my opinion, are at running back, are at defensive tackle, and are at are at safety as well. Strong safety to be exact. Starting out with running back, it's very, very straightforward. There are four guys contending for a handful of snaps. Now, factor in the notion that Malik Cunningham is going to get a lot of snaps, considering the fact that he is one of the best dual threat quarterbacks in the country. He's going to get a lot of the workload. So, as much as this is a kind of a run dominant offense, there's only so many snaps to go around. Four guys competing for a handful of snaps, and they've all kind of have had their moments. Jalen Mitchell is a guy that's was the starter for most of the year last year. Trevion Cooley had some big time moments, had some solid performances. Jawhar Jordan at the end of the year looked very solid, looked good against Air Force, had a big time kick return touchdown, and then Tiyon Evans, who a lot of people kind of figured to be like the Michael Dyer of this team, that's going to come in and be like the explosive option that might not necessarily be the starter right away, but he might get the majority of the snaps. So this is kind of the number one position battle that I'm looking forward to, because it's like, okay, who in the world is going to separate themselves? And it truly is iron sharpening iron. Darrell Sims, the running back coach last year, said it over and over. It is a good problem to have when you have all of these guys that truly have a healthy competition, that are cheering for each other and rooting for each other. But it's also, it's a competition because they're still competing for the spots. If I had to take a guess, I think that Jalen Mitchell will probably be the starter for week one. You're going to see Tiyon Evans get a lot of snaps, along with Trevion Cooley. I think that Jawhar Jordan might be a little bit on the outside looking in, more so limited to special teams in certain passing down situations. So one of the other position battles, I should say, is at defensive tackle. Obviously, Jermaine Lelay listed as the backup to Dez Tell at nose tackle, but Caleb Banks at the third string. By the time the first game rolls around, I would expect Jermaine Lole to be the starter at the nose tackle position. That really opens up the possibility for a big-time battle at the backup position, because, like I said, I think that Caleb Banks, listed as 6'7", over 300 pounds, really fits the mold at nose tackle of what Mark Ivey and company are looking for. A guy that is very quick on his feet, just has a ton of talent. It was a matter of just getting his body right and of getting his footwork down. And a lot of the national recruiting analysts were very, very high on Caleb Banks coming out of high school. So I think that Dez Tell and Caleb Banks really battling here at nose tackle, that you have a lot of options that you can go with. You have some depth that, Louisville has not had since early on in the Bobby Petrino era, Todd Grantham days, so on and so forth. The other position battle that I'm very, very interested in, this is probably the one that I might be interested in the most. It's MJ Griffin and Josh Minkins Jr. at the strong safety position. I was honestly expecting Griffin to be listed as the starter. I think that he's probably the replacement to Kei'Trel Cole, but honestly, I'm kind of shifted more towards it being a by committee approach, because Minkins last year might have, really given Q Cole a run for his money, but really spent a lot of time hurt and, had the injury bug kind of came, into his health last year. toward the end of the season, was able to play some big time snaps down the stretch. Has a ton of talent, has a ton of size with his 6'2" frame. I think that MJ Griffin is probably a little bit better of a run defender, but Josh Minkins has the frame, has the pursuit, has the footwork, has the ability to cover sideline to sideline. I think it's going to be one of those instances to where, yeah, you focus on who's going to be the listed starter, but both these guys are very, very good, and they're going to have very good seasons for Louisville. I'm very, very excited to see what Wesley McGriff, Greg Gasparato are able to kind of do with both of these guys. MJ Griffin, Josh Minkins Jr. Sorry about that. But some key position battles, at running back, at defensive tackle, at strong safety. It's not a matter of who's going to, step up if they have a starting level guy. It's who's going to separate themselves. It's a different context, a different connotation, because all these guys are seemingly fit to be in a starting role. It's just a matter of only so many spots for so many guys. So very good problems to have. A lot of guys returning for the Cardinals created this good problem to have. But we'll continue to take a look at the depth chart as it kind of goes throughout fall camp, talk about who we hear is having some solid moments and stuff like that, and some phenomenons that we will pick up on, trends and things of that nature. But that's going to wrap up this Sunday edition of the show. Everyone have a great day. We will see you right back here tomorrow.